Hey everyone! So for my tutorial today, I'm going to show you how to edit your image using just one tool in Photoshop. And the tool we're going to focus on today is levels. So I tell Photoshop beginners, if you can learn one tool in Photoshop, you can do just about anything you're going to need to do. And that tool is levels. I feel like it's an easier tool to understand than curves. And the great thing about levels is that it's available in both Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. Now, you all know that I suggest Photoshop, the full Photoshop, that's $10 a month through Adobe Creative Cloud. It's the photographer plan. And that includes Photoshop and Lightroom. What we have today is I have these doll pictures here. These were just pictures that I took out on my porch. And this is a little doll that is my daughter's that I use a lot. So you'll see this doll a lot. And the thing I want to tell you about these images is these were actually taken with a camera that I got for under $75. I think it ended up being like $74 and some change, and I got it on eBay. It's an Olympus pen EPL1, and it has and it came with the kit lens, so it was the camera plus the lens. It's a mirrorless camera. You hear me talk about mirrorless cameras a lot because I actually just switched to a much more expensive version of the Olympus pen, and I have a lot of lenses and stuff, but I actually just switched to a mirrorless system, and I'm so in love with it, and I don't know that I'll ever go back to just a regular digital SLR ever again. I mean, maybe I will, but it would probably just be something that I like rented for like a special occasion if I needed a full frame camera, because I'm just so in love with this. It's so lightweight. It has interchangeable lenses, just like a digital SLR, but it's lightweight, much more portable. I feel like it's easier to get out. Like I don't feel like, oh, I'm dragging out all this equipment. So I really love it. And now the EPL1, I think it was one of the first like mirrorless digital cameras out on the market. So it's not going to do great in like really low light, and it's not going to do, it's only like 12 megapixels. So it's not like you're going to be able to blow up like a 8 by 6 foot mural on your wall or anything, but for what it is, it does do leaps and bounds better than a cell phone. So if you're somebody who's just stuck with a cell phone and you're like, oh, I'm never going to have the money to shell out $600 on a digital SLR and a nice lens, this is something I seriously think that you should look into because it just does a really great job. And I feel like the kit lens that came with it is much better than the Canon or Nikon kit lenses. And which seems silly because like when you see this lens, it's so tiny. Like it's such a tiny little lens. It like fits in the palm of my hand and it's so light. It weighs nothing. So you wouldn't think that it looks like a toy almost. So you wouldn't think it does a good job. But these are some of the first pictures I took with it. I just, kind of put it in there and just took the pictures, and you can see you get that beautiful, we're getting that beautiful bokeh here in the background. Let me zoom in on this one here. And you cannot get this with a cell phone. And I'm going to explain to you why. So I know I said we're going to talk about levels, but I also just want to explain this to you guys too. So this image here, you can see over here in my metadata here. This was taken at an ISO of 200. The shutter speed was 1/200th of a second, so it's a fairly fast shutter. The ISO is low because there's a lot of sunlight. So if there's a lot of sunlight out, then you can have your ISO lower. The less light you have, the higher you want your ISO. And then my aperture is 5.6. So a lot of times when you hear people and they say, well, how do you get blur in the background? A lot of people will tell you to shoot wide open or make your aperture, the number would be really low. So and this is why aperture is the most confusing thing in the photography world, is because the lower the aperture number, so the lower the f-stop, the wider your aperture is. And that confuses people because people will say, shoot with a wider aperture, but it's a lower number. So I know that's confusing. But you can see here, I shot at 5.6, which isn't a very wide aperture. So you might be thinking like, why is there so much bokeh? So I'm going to explain that to you. This was shot at, like I said, this came with the kit lens. The kit lens is 14 millimeters to 44 millimeters. And that refers to the focal length of the camera. And so this was shot at almost completely zoomed in. So when I'm almost completely zoomed in, and I'm close to my subject like this, you're always going to have more blur. And then also these trees that are behind this little doll are pretty far away from her. They're like, I don't know, they're probably like 5-10 feet behind her. So that with a longer focal length is making what we call lens compression. So it's kind of compressing the image and making things kind of like smush together as far as, what it looks like when it makes the final image. So that's also getting that's what's causing all this nice little bokeh back here. And bokeh are these little, like the light through the trees is making these little dots. And then, the background blur. So that's what's causing this. And the reason why you can't get this same result with a cell phone camera is because most cell phone lenses are like 18 to like 22 millimeters. So you don't get that compression. And without that compression, we're not getting that bokeh. So if I took the same picture with my cell phone camera, you would see a little bit more of the trees in the back. Now, it would probably be still fairly blurry because, this is such a small little doll and I'm so close to it, but it would probably be something a little bit more like maybe this one where, you can see more of the trees. It's not like you can see more of the detail of my yard in the back. Where with this one, you don't really know what's back there. It just looks like kind of a pretty green background. So that was my little lens lesson for the day. So now let's just go into editing this. So this image here, we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to double click it and that's going to open it up in Adobe Camera Raw. And the reason why it's opening up in Adobe Camera Raw is because we are using a raw image, and for a raw image to be opened up in Photoshop, it has to be processed first. So I'm going to go ahead and process this, and what I do in Adobe Camera Raw is I do just very basic exposure and white balance adjustments. Well, we're not trying to get all of our edits done in Adobe Camera Raw, so we're just going to do very basic things. So the first thing I always fix on an image is my white balance, and there's a white balance tool here. It's a little dropper, and what you want to do is you want to place the white balance dropper on like a neutral part of the image. So you can see I have this shirt that's like supposed to be white, and then I also have, this is probably like the road or my sidewalk or something. And you can see depending on where I click, there's kind of, one's a little bit of a cooler look and one's a little bit more of a warmer look. And then what I can do is I can actually go over these sliders and then I can just kind of fine tune it until these colors, what I'm looking at is I want the colors of this doll to be true to life. So I'm just trying to get them true to life. And when I, think that looks good, like that's way too cool. But I actually think that looks good as far as like the green of her shirt and stuff. If I had the doll here and her hair and all that kind of stuff, that looks pretty good. The other thing you can do when you're in Camera Raw is just really basic exposure fixes. So I'm just going to bump this is a tiny bit underexposed. So I'm going to bump my exposure just a tiny bit. And I think that's all I'm really going to do because I just want a good overall like exposed image. I don't want to bump my exposure or my highlights up anymore because I'm going to start to get this hair blown out and I don't want that because the light was coming from this angle. So you can see that in the image. So her hair is kind of lit up back here. So we just want to be careful not to blow this side of the image out. So once we're happy with it, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Open Image. And this is going to go ahead and open up our image in Photoshop. And now our image is in Photoshop and now we're going to use levels. And there are two ways that you can use levels. You can get in a levels adjustment layer. The first, and the one that I've seen a lot of people teach, I'm going to tell you right now is wrong. So just don't do this. They'll go to image, then they'll go to adjustments, and then they'll go to levels, and then they'll change the levels here. And the problem with that, I'm just going to change this here and click OK. So the problem with that is once I change the levels there, the only way to get rid of that change that I made is to undo it. And that's okay if I just did it once, but if I'm starting to make a bunch of changes to my image, like you can only go back and undo so many steps. So that is what we call destructive editing. And what I'll see a lot of people do is they'll just say, okay, well then I'll just like duplicate this layer. And you can just do that by pulling it down to the new layer button there. You can duplicate the layer and then go up here to image and adjustment layers and apply your levels or whatever and change it. And then they just keep doing it. And then they just keep copying the layer or whatever. And that's just madness. So we're not going to do that anymore. You guys are all going to promise that you'll never do that. If people tell you to do that, just stop watching that tutorial. So, because they're wrong. And I mean, I don't often my way is the only way, but I'm just telling you, you'll save yourself a lot of grief and headaches if you just learn how to use adjustment layers. And so what an adjustment layer is it's the exact same thing. We're going to go over to this little button here. It's a half black, half white circle. Or you can also open up the adjustment panel and you can put it in your little panels here. So you could go to Window Adjustments and you could open it up and drag it in here to your little panel. So it just depends on what you want to do. And so I'm going to click here and I'm going to go to Levels. And you can see that this looks the same as it did when we went up here. But the great thing about this is I can keep changing it. So I can adjust the levels here and just make some really weird adjustment. I can adjust the levels here, and then if I want to get rid of it, whoa, that's way overexposed looking now, I can just delete it, and it goes away. Or I can also go in and change it. So I could, make the adjustment, go back, do whatever I want to do, double click back on this, and I can change it. So it works just a lot better that way. And so that is the way that I'm going to show you how to do it, because it's just the better way to edit. It's called non-destructive editing because you're not doing anything directly to your background layer. And that's you always want to strive when you do your edits to keep your background layer pure, because as long as you don't do anything to this background layer, you can always go back to the beginning. And this is so important for people that are learning editing, because you will screw up. You'll make mistakes, and that's fine. I make mistakes, and I've been doing this for 15 years. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make our levels adjustment layer. And we're just going to make a general adjustments layer. And I'm just going to go through the steps of kind of what I do to make my levels adjustments. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make our general levels adjustment layer. And you can see here in this window, there's a histogram. So this is the dark areas of the image, and then these are the light areas, the highlights of the image. And what I'm going to do is you can see that this part of my histogram doesn't reach all the way over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this slider. So this slider is for highlights, and then this slider is for blacks. You can see that when I do that. And then these are for your shadows up and down. We're going to leave those alone. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this highlights slider till it meets the middle, till it meets the end of this histogram, because this is how we add depth and contrast to our image. So you can see when I slide that up, it brightens the highlights a little bit and it gives this a little bit more depth. And it's pretty subtle at this point, but we're going to keep doing this. So then excuse me. So now what I want to do is I want to focus on the doll itself. I want to make a levels adjustment layer, but I just want to make it to the doll. So I don't want to do anything to the rest of the image. And that's the other great thing about using adjustment layers versus just going up to image adjustments, is that I can now make selective adjustments to just the areas of the image that I want to make an adjustment to. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the quick mask tool. And that's over here, all the way at the bottom of your tool panel is this little rectangle with a circle in the middle. You can also press Q on your keyboard, and that's going to activate the quick mask mode. And now I'm going to take my brush, and you want to make sure that you use a soft, round brush. So you can right click, or you can right click on your mouse, and you can choose a round brush, and you want to make sure that its hardness is 0. And so with quick mask mode activated, okay, oops. So with quick mask mode activated, now I'm going to brush over my doll. And when I brush over her, the areas that I brush over are going to turn this green color, which I know might seem a little scary because you're like, what are you doing to that poor doll? She's going to look horrible. But now you'll see when I press Q again, it's going to exit quick mask mode. And now what I've done is I basically just made this selection of this doll here. And now I'm going to go over and I'm going to add a new levels adjustment layer. And it's just going to, you can see, instead of this mask being completely white, it's only white on the area of the doll because that's the area that I want to edit. And this doll has, the doll is a little bit, the shadows of the doll are a little dark, and I want to make them a little lighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this middle slider, and I'm going to move it to the left a little bit, and we're going to brighten her up a little bit. And I'm going to do it like right about there. And you can see I don't need to do anything to my the shadows or the highlights. Those look pretty good. So I'm going to just leave those alone. And then I can focus in on the other areas of the doll. Like this area of the doll right here is a little darker, so I can press Q on my keyboard. I can press down on the doll and do just this area of the doll, press Q on my keyboard again. Do another levels adjustment layer. And you can see that's going to bring up the highlights. And so I'm just bringing it to the edge of the histogram there. And so that makes her much brighter, and we're starting to get more contrast and depth. So now I want to work on the background a little bit. I want to put a little bit more separation between the doll and the background. So we're going to press Q again, and we're going to select this area of my background here. I'm going to press Q, make a new levels adjustment layer, and we can brighten this up a little bit. But then I'm also going to pull down the shadows a little bit because I think I want the background to be, trying to decide if I want it to be a little darker. Yeah, I think I want it to be a little darker. So I'm going to pull down the mid-tone slider here. That's what this middle thing is the mid-tone slider. I'm going to pull it down a little bit. I'm actually going to just not bump the highlights up all the way because I want there to be like this nice separation. And then I also want the background to be a little bit more like matte. So I'm going to use these sliders down here, and I'm going to pull this down a little bit, and that's going to make this a little bit more matte. And you can see it almost makes it look a little blurrier, but it's not. It's just, I can pull all the way down and it makes it black, but we're not going to do that. I'm just going to pull it down just a tiny bit, like 250. Okay, and then I like that because that's created this nice like separation between like the doll here and this area here. All right, and then so I think that looks pretty good. So let's take a look at the before and after, because I think we all agreed that the before wasn't that bad. But what I did was I just added, like selectively added some contrast, and I really made this doll pop a little bit more. So I'm going to just select these layers here, and I'm going to put them in a group so I can just show you. So this is our before, and you can see it's kind of flat, a little underexposed. And then here's the after. We definitely have more of, there's more separation between the doll and the background. The doll pops more. She's not flat. And so we just use the one tool in Photoshop. So if there is any tool that you're going to use in Photoshop, Levels is really the one to use and play around with because you can do so much with it. It's so versatile. And, if you're someone who's still learning Photoshop and maybe you need to do a little bit more than just, like contrast and exposure adjustments, I really suggest checking out my Photoshop actions. I have great actions for doing all kinds of stuff like letting in light, adding light, decreasing shadows, making backgrounds white. It's a really great set. And you can get that in the shop. And if you have any questions about level adjustments or want to know more about how you can use levels on your image, go ahead and ask your questions down in the comment section. And I will see you again in the next tutorial. Bye.